Hi, I'm Richie Zellon, and in this video, I bring you the 9th in a series of 10 tips to improve your jazz guitar solos. In this lesson, which I've fittingly entitled Breathe, we'll explore the meaning and adequate use of rests when improvising. And when all is said and done, I will leave you with 5 important tips on how to practice incorporating more space into your solos. Coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Guitar Channel, and if this is your first time and you want to learn everything you can about the art of playing jazz guitar, please subscribe and be sure to click the bell icon so you won't miss anything. This lesson is aptly entitled Breathe, a vital action that many guitarists are guilty of not performing on a normal basis when improvising. But I believe this wasn't always the case with guitarists. I would venture to say that when I was growing up back in the late 60s into the 70s, I witnessed the birth of shredding. Now, this isn't what my heroes at the time were doing, and I'm talking about Hendrix and Clapton, among others. These cats understood the use of space. The shredders I'm referring to are the guitarists that started using technique and speed as an end in itself. These are the players that play endless choruses of solos comprised of blistering fast lines across the fretboard, rarely inserting any space. It's the spoken language equivalent to opening your mouth and shouting whatever you have to say without inserting any commas or periods until you're done. Yeah, as a kid, I was initially impressed with the shredders, but truth be told, it gets old very quickly, unless of course you are blasted out of your mind. Great musicians throughout history have been talking about the meaning and importance of the proper use of space in music. In the classical field, composer Debussy stated that music is the space between the notes. This concept was later reinforced among jazz musicians, namely by Miles Davis, when he said, "Don't play what is there, play what is not there." And it's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play. And he didn't just say it, you could hear it in his playing. Miles was a master of the use of space. And on guitar, I believe no one exemplified this better than the late, great Jim Hall. Now, I know many of you find this whole less is more concept abstract and want me to demonstrate it on the instrument, which I will shortly. However, before I do, I want to explain a little bit more about the concept so you know what to listen for, both in other players and in your own head when improvising. And before saying anything else, there is something I need to clarify. I'm not saying that you should use so much space that you become a minimalist, unless, of course, that is what you are going for. To that effect, even busy players like Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, in the midst of their busy lines, employed commas and periods at the end of their phrases in the form of rests. The same can be said today of several busy jazz guitarists, such as, say, Pat Martino, who for me immediately comes to mind. Now, back to Miles. What he did, particularly in the 50s, was to tone down the use of so many notes, which was typical among bebop players. And he started using shorter motifs and rhythmic cells in his phrasing. And as a result, the space gave more meaning to the notes being played, and the listener started hearing the poetry in the music. This really hooked the listener. Just listen to Kind of Blue. And it's no coincidence that it's the best-selling jazz album in history. And by the way, if you want to study a great solo from this album, be sure to check out my lesson where I teach Miles' solo on So What, and I'll be sure to place a link down below. Throughout this series, I've stated on several occasions that great improvisers are like storytellers. Well, the use of space allows the listener to digest a phrase, which in turn creates excitement and a sense of anticipation as to how the improviser is going to develop his next phrase. Great solos use this concept and gradually build to a climax, which is the final act in the story. Another important reason why we need to explore the use of space between the notes has to do with the title of this lesson. Breathe. When we breathe in our solos, we are resembling closer the human voice, which is what we instrumentalists should be initially modeling our phrases on. Remember, we don't want to sound mechanical like robots. And believe me, even the untrained ear can detect when something sounds mechanical. And this is partly the reason you have many pianists who sing along with what they are playing when improvising. One of the most obvious ones is, of course, Keith Jarrett. But trust me, I've heard a lot of other greats do it in a softer way. By doing this, they make sure they don't play anything that doesn't require space or breath like the human voice. Of course, horn players are already doing this because they are using their breath to play the instrument. And on that note, I'm ready to do a demonstration on how I would use space. After this, I will give you 5 tips on how to practice incorporating more space into your solos. Here goes. So before I conclude, I want to share with you 5 tips which will help you practice incorporating space into your solos. Number 1, start your first chorus, or at least the first half of it, using shorter phrases with more space in between them. Think of it as the opening to your story. Number 2, be sure to vary the placement of your rests. For example, don't always place them at the end of a measure. This will be ineffective and make your solo very predictable, not to mention sound fragmented. Be sure to phrase over the bar line, at least for the most part. And if you don't understand this concept, be sure to watch tip number 4 in this series. Number 3, after playing a short phrase, use the rest that follows to try to hear a motivic answer to what you just played, so you can continue in this fashion with some kind of thematic development. And this comes from the African call and answer concept that is predominant in traditional blues. And yes, when playing over a standard, this takes lots more practice and, of course, ear training. But in the end, it's what makes a solo sound interesting and, as a result, grabs the listener's attention. Number 4, try to sing what you improvise. Like I stated earlier, not only will this force you to breathe and pace yourself, but it will put you, the musician, in control of the instrument and not vice versa. Now again, I know this requires you to pre-hear in your head what you are going to play a split second before doing so, but this is the ultimate goal. And yes, again, it will take ear training if you don't already have it. Also, don't worry about not being perfectly in tune when singing. This is to be done softly, not for your audience to hear, but for your personal sake. Number 5, finally, I recommend that you learn how to solo over ballads. This may sound crazy to some, but soloing over a ballad is one of the most difficult things to accomplish effectively. And this is because of the amount of space that is naturally built into it due to its slow tempo. I recall when I was on the faculty at a couple of music schools and we had to grade jazz students on their solos at the end of each semester. Sometimes they had to improvise over a medium tempo standard and then over a ballad. You'd hear them play the swing tune with no problem. That is most of the time. But when it came to the ballad, they didn't know how to phrase and make use of the space at that slow tempo. So they would ramble on playing meaningless notes and put you to sleep because essentially they weren't saying anything. So just because there is more time in a ballad to squeeze more notes, it doesn't mean you should do so. When improvising over a ballad, everything you play is magnified. It's like your musicality is put under a microscope. So remember, on a ballad, even more so than at other higher tempos, less is more. And I could go on and on about the subject, but I'm going to stop here. Maybe I'll do a whole lesson just devoted to playing jazz ballads in the future. If you haven't had a chance to watch the other videos in this series, I am placing an index with links to them in the info section down below. As usual, I'd love to hear your comments and welcome your questions. Hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and here's a video I believe you should watch next. Have fun, and I will see you in the next one.